Okay, so my name is Ariel Varela, and this is my presentation of youth violence. I decided to interview somebody from my old high school, and it's in Fallbrook High School up in North County. I interviewed a student aid worker. She particularly works with freshmen adolescents. So they're between the ages of 14 and 15. And I was able to look up on our US Census just some basic information about Fallbrook. I thought it was interesting to see that Fallbrook is predominantly considered white, 83%, but 47% of that is Hispanic or Latino, and then 45.6% of that is just white alone. So a good majority of it is Hispanic. And then as far as the other minorities, there they are. As far as the housing, it looks like 60% of it is owner occupied housing, which means about the rest would be rentals, 40%. The median household income is 63,000. And then the per capita income is actually fairly low. So it's 28,804. And a big percentage that stuck out to me was 12.8% of poverty in Fallbrook, which is substantially high as far as poverty goes. Starting off my interview, I did ask, where you do your work, and she responded in North County. Been working there for about 2 years in middle school and high school. And then I did ask her, do you live in this community? And she said, no, she lives in Temecula, which is a 30-minute drive from here. Oftentimes, school workers who work in public school systems don't actually live in that community from which they are teaching from. And I did ask, what is your responsibility as far as your job? And she replied as she is that teacher aide that assists ELD students. So people who aren't fluent with English, and she provides additional help to these students in the math class. Generally, she ends up helping most of the students who attend the class, but specifically her role is to help the ELD students so they can improve in their academic studies as far as math. So I did want to go ahead and ask, what are the socioeconomic status of the students? And she said the majority of the students that she works with is definitely people from Mexico who are coming in. Some students were undocumented, and she's assuming that they are going to be low income or working class. As far as job opportunities in the community, she said Fallbrook is a big agricultural location. So there's a lot of farms and nurseries that hire these youth, but it is hard labor with minimal pay. The majority of the students will have to commute out of Fallbrook, or they Camp Pendleton military base is an option as far as opportunities for these students locally. Here's one of the things that I kind of like to talk about, and what's one of my research is that do immigrants coming from a different country end up being more violent? And it's interesting to see that in this study of 2018, Light and Miller found that immigration actually reduces criminal violence in cities. And even in pro-immigration policy sanctuary cities, you see that a reduction in violence as far as law enforcement with, as far as like what law enforcement sees in their statistics, they see a reduction in violence. And then they find that generally immigration, especially undocumented immigration, will decrease violent crime in certain areas. There's a negative associations between violence and immigration in American populations, which is interesting to think about, because that means that the rhetoric of people who are not from here are violent, and they come in and they kind of start these violent trends, and that's a lie. It looks like the majority of immigrants don't cause more violence in communities. So one of the big questions that is important to us is there violence in this community? The aid worker indicated that school fights do happen. It seems to be that what she's seen is between some gang members within the school, and it looks like it's rivalries that escalate into these fights. Have you personally seen any fights or how severe they are? And she indicated that she has, usually during lunch. She's seen it happen. She's seen students fighting each other, and then even staff being attacked physically, which is just something to think about as far as it can make the relationship between the educational institution and these behavioral students having these behavioral issues. It can make that relationship difficult when this level of violence happens, especially when the people who are taking care of these kids are being attacked. It's something that can cause significant changes in policy that can affect these students. And then who are the victims? So from her opinion, it looks like it is mostly Hispanic community gang members against the Paula Reservation gang members. So it looks like some type of rivalry between these two. And they each have their own kind of areas. And that's where you see a lot of that, who's the victim and who's doing the violence. It just depends on who's in which area within the school. Okay, so it looks like I did ask, is there an outside influence that may be promoting violence within this community? And the answer was interesting. It was a personal observation that some of the gang members may have relatives within gangs that may be older and that may be enticing them to join and further participate in that gang behavior and lifestyle. And I asked, what kind of resources do you have inside the school as far as how these students are disciplined, as far as how they are trying to work with these students and any type of resources they have available. And they said they don't have police resource officer. They used to have one, but it was only temporary. What they do have is just security guards, about 5 or so, and cameras that they do have that usually are located where they are conveniently located at. But it is interesting to see that those are the only resources the school uses. Is it just kind of does its own type of policing and really just kind of watches their activity like that. So the big thing is, how are they trying to prevent the violence? And as far as after school programs specifically tailored for it, they don't have one. She suggested that a lot of the kids are interested in sports, and that is kind of a way for them to steer away from that kind of lifestyle. However, there's barriers, economic barriers for the sports, and it's if the parents have enough income to support that type of lifestyle. Caleb. So as far as what's the site doing to prevent violence at school? I did ask, are there any after school programs? And then once again, she did say that those sport programs are there, but there are barriers for it as far as money. It does cost money to join them. And if they are, if the parents can't pay for that, then there's not much. She did touch on the way the teens are punished is that they're suspended, or eventually they can get expelled. And once they are expelled, they're sent to like an alternative school, which is called IB. And then they can receive like a GED at that school. And interestingly enough, the IB alternative schools is right across the street from the high school. So it's interesting to see how they're right next to each other. But as far as how they deal with the kids, so it looks like they just get suspended, and then they can be kicked out eventually for acts of violence. So that's one of the things that I really wanted to talk about as far as policy. And according to Morgan, research on school discipline is punitive approach in urban schools and other schools, specifically people of color. It's a big problem because there is bias in the way policy is acted on, and usually it is really discrimination against people of color. So you'll see punitive policy used more on people of color. So more suspensions, more expulsions for people of color. And then the punitive punishment, like a suspension or expulsion, is really there to encourage these people to be out of the classroom. And that kind of just promotes more delinquency as far as missing out on school. There is a lot of research saying that restorative justice policies is a much better alternative form for school implementing consequences, because then they don't lose that academic seat time. Physically being present at school is a safer environment, and it provides more stability and consistency to these kids and teens. So removing these kids from that stable environment only encourages them to be involved back in that unsupervised community, where they can be further involved in gangs or criminal justice system. It's one of those areas of like research that I believe is a much better alternative. Let's do restorative justice, as far as it really comes out with participatory involvement, as far as the person who has done the harm and the person who was harmed. They both must reach an agreement, and then the school has to really make sure the person follows through that agreement. And usually by following through whatever they agreed on, the individual can still stay in school, and they could perhaps learn a little bit more about the other party whom they're harming. And most of the time, they can see some type of connection, or at least acknowledge that the thing that they did was wrong. And that would be much better, instead of just suspending them or taking them out. Because once they do that, they don't really change their behavior. It most of the time will increase that behavior. One of the things that I also saw in research is, according to Van Tallman Gonzalez, nearly 2/3 of gang-affiliated youth did aspire, or do they aspire to have a college degree, which I thought was extremely surprising. So even if you're a part of a gang, you still see yourself going to college and succeeding. And it goes to show that just that negative connotation of what is a gang member doesn't allow just even me to see that type of pathway for them. So Van also sees that they saw in some of their connections, as far as teenagers, friends, as long as a friend or a couple of friends that they are close to do set up a plan to go to college. Statistically, there's correlations that as long as they have that association, and they really do have a good friendship, that friend who does plan to go to college can change the behavior of the gang member and actually encourage less substance abuse, as far as using recreational drugs, and have them more involved in the college process. So it's just kind of, once again, shows how important it is to have these at-risk members to continue going to school and harboring good relationships, not just expelling them and putting them in an alternative classroom. It looks like if they do have friendships that are more positive role models, they can truly influence them to kind of reduce that type of risky behaviors like substance abuse. And it not only improves their lives, but it can improve the community's lives together. If the gang member is being discouraged to not use drugs and to not be as violent because of those friends, then the community also profits like that, which is awesome to see. And then these are my scholarly articles. I hope I recorded this correctly. Thank you for your time.